Hi, everyone. Okay, so friendship. Um, my ideas of friendship actually have changed quite radically in the last year because of some of the things that I've talked about in different forum posts and papers and stuff. The really hard time that I went through at the beginning of last year, kind of through the middle of it, and still currently. For me, deep friendship is birthed through deep vulnerability, deep community, and the friends that I've made through this process of learning this are definitely the deepest friendships that I've had ever. The so the questions that we were asked to deal with were what made the friendships deep, and I believe that it was vulnerability, the ability to truly open up to one another, to trust, to take a chance on just bearing your soul, if you will. Um, and so that's kind of what I see where true friendship is birthed from. A few of the deep friendships that I had were ones that, when I was going through the hard time, would just come over and sit with me while I either cried or got lost in a Netflix series, or just whatever the case was. They were there with me. It wasn't this, I want to come over and fix the problem. It was this true radical ability to be with me in it. And while my attempt at being vulnerable with them, in other words, telling them when I was hurting and I need somebody to come over and be with me, or being open to crying with them, and sharing that pain. It was also vulnerable on their part to be able to sit with me and say, I'm going to sit with you in this pain, because I see that as a deep vulnerability as well. They don't have to, a lot of people have the tendency to want to silver line problems, or to well, at least you have breath, or there's so many other people that have problems, but when you're in the middle of suffering, those kind of things really don't help, and it takes a level of vulnerability to be able to reach deep within yourself and connect with the pain of another. And this is actually something in oh gosh, I can't remember that guy's last name. Fitzgerald, I think it was, in his when he was talking about from the Johannine part, um, wrote some notes. He talks about the friend that's willing to die for you. And now I definitely know that a lot of my friends were willing to do that, and they didn't. That wasn't really the they didn't die for me, but there was kind of this death to themselves that they had to connect with in me as I went through the pain that I went through. Was almost a death that I went through, an emotional death, and they had to connect with that process, and they were actually willing to do that. Um, it's kind of interesting because um, he talks initially about that revelation necessarily means that friendship exists, and then he goes in to show how Christ's actions were the revelation, was the thing that created friendship. And I know that this is kind of maybe getting on a semantics kick, but when he started talking about that kind of revelation, I actually heard and read vulnerability. Christ was willing to be deeply connected with these disciples to show them that community, true community, exists in a co-desire to be vulnerable and open. And the way that that truly happens is by one individual, Christ in this situation, making the first attempt and basically being the model to show them how to do those things. And so then we see in Paul's writings him doing those things as he talks about the different individuals that he's close with throughout all of his writings, in Romans and in Timothy and in Philippians, and et cetera, et cetera. And this comes through Paul's concept of koinonia. As Fitzgerald was kind of talking about that in there, but I mean, it's just replete throughout those writings and in Paul's writings on in Philippians. And I know that this kind of is for me, this is kind of the bridging of the psychology and the theology is the theology piece is how do we honor God through our connection in our community, through the koinonia and fellowship with other believers. And the psychology piece teaches us how being vulnerable actually increases our ability to connect with our emotions and to be more healthily connected with who we are, which results in a whole bunch of positive things in the brain and in the body. And I could go on and about that stuff. So for me, the deepest relationships that I've had came from community and vulnerability, and the deep levels of those things. So that's what I think.